All right, next let's get into the delivery of the sermon. How do you deliver it? So you've realized what your task is. You've sought to develop a sermon that hits all the points of that second video, and now this video will cover the delivery. Number one, I would say get very, very familiar with the text. Get very familiar with your sermon. Get very familiar with your notes, so that when you deliver it, you know what you're preaching. You know what you're delivering. You're not having to constantly look back and think, okay, like, I'm not saying don't have any notes. I'm not saying don't have a manuscript. Use whatever method you think is best. But what I'm saying is you shouldn't be unfamiliar with your sermon where you don't even know what you're saying. If you memorize your sermon, that's good, but just get familiar by getting sucked into the sermon. And this will help you to preach better because you'll know what you're preaching. You'll know the way you've been wrestling with the text. You've been laboring over the text. You yourself have been preaching to yourself the entire week. You've been gripped by the message. And so when you are doing this, you're memorizing the sermon, you're wrestling it with yourself. When you deliver this sermon, you're delivering a sermon, not that you're having to learn, or not that has logical points that you are having trouble connecting because you don't know how the sermon flows. No, when you do this, when you get sucked in with the text, when you preach to yourself, when you get familiar with the text, you'll be able to move from point to point. You'll be able to deliver the sermon as one cohesive thought more than a bunch of independently true statements that you just combine in one sermon. So the delivery, before you get into the pulpit, you yourself should have wrestled with your own sermon to the point where you know it. You know it, you've been gripped by it, it's fed your soul the entire week, and now when you deliver it, you know what you're preaching. You know what's going to hit. You know what's going to be heavy. I know when I go into a sermon, I know what I have to preach, but then I know that part of the sermon where I say this part of the sermon is really going to grip the hearts of God's people if he wills it to be the case. Next, the delivery, I would say preach how you pray. What do I mean by that? A lot of guys, they pray a certain way and they pray powerfully, they pray beautifully, and then when they go to preach, it's a different voice. When you preach, use your own voice. Yes, you'll seek to heighten at times. You'll seek to, I don't walk around preaching to everyone and have the way I preach on a Sunday morning, but in a sense, you can look up on a Sunday morning and say, okay, that's him. He's preaching, yes, he's getting more engaged, but that's him. Rather than someone outside the pulpit, and then when they step into the pulpit, it's someone completely different. It's someone that you yourself would say, well, I talk to him all the time and he does not talk like that. He's using different vocabulary. He sounds different. He's even expressing himself differently. So just preach how you would pray and pray powerfully. And the more you pray powerfully, the more you'll preach powerfully. But just find your voice. Use body language. If I want to communicate something heavy, I'm going to use my hands. If I want to, communicate that the gospel is far reaching, I'm going to, make my body help me. Body language, it does communicate. So find your voice, use your natural voice. But remember, if you know your sermon, you'll be able to know, okay, this part's coming up. I can really engage the listener now. But you have to know your sermon. You have to know your voice. You have to find your voice. You have to know what body language is. And also preach the ethos of the text. What do I mean by that? When you preach a sermon on the crucifixion, there's going to be some somberness to it. There's going to be some weight to it. There's going to be some heaviness to it. When you preach on trials, you're going to preach in a voice that communicates, this is heavy. But when you preach on joy, you should be joyful as you preach on joy. So preach the ethos of the text, the way that the emotion of the text. Let that fuel your emotion as you preach. And always preach your sermons in a lively and engaging way. And as you apply the sermon, as you seek to move the sermon from the head to the heart and to the hands, do so in a way that's captivating and that shows, man, this is that important, that it is for the glory of Christ, that it is for his kingdom. And you have to communicate this with your voice, with your body, as you're pleading with God's people. One of the Puritans used to say, we're not trying to get slaves to row their way to the jails where they're going to serve. No, we're trying to woo people to Christ. We're trying to win the hearts of people to Christ. So he's saying you're not just trying to do something, some task that no one wants to do. No, you're trying to get the listener to see the importance, the vitality, and the liveliness of the text. So this is the delivery of a sermon.